Queen Sorvith sat on her throne and stared at the wall. She had been doing this for 40 days. Just sitting. Just staring. The great stone chair beneath her was carved from the black mountain rock of Varades Prime, hard and cold, and she had not moved from it except to sleep. Even then, she slept in the throne room, curled on the floor beside the base of the throne like an old animal that had forgotten how to leave its den. She was the most powerful ruler in this part of the galaxy. 5 dragon sovereigns ruled the Dracari people, and Sorvith was the oldest among them. She had ruled for 300 years. She had survived wars, droughts, political collapse, and the slow death of 2 stars in her outer territories. She had never broken. But 40 days ago her daughter had died. Princess Vaethra. 24 years old. Young by Dracari standards, barely grown. She had been sick for only 9 days before the illness took her. 9 days was nothing. 9 days was too fast for anyone to understand what was happening, too fast for the healers to find an answer, too fast for Sorvith to do anything except sit beside her daughter's bed and watch. And then Vaethra was gone. And Sorvith had not spoken since. It was not a choice exactly. In the first days she had tried to speak and found that the words simply were not there. Her mouth would open and nothing would come. So she stopped trying. She signed documents when her chief advisor, Lord Vicus, placed them in front of her. She nodded or shook her head when answers were needed. But she did not speak and she did not look at anyone directly, and the golden light that had always lived in her eyes had gone somewhere far away and had not come back. The palace had changed because of it. The servants walked more softly than usual. The guards stood straighter and spoke less. The long hallways that had once been full of quiet conversation and the sound of claws on stone were now almost completely silent. Everyone could feel that something was wrong at the center of the palace, the way you can feel a crack in the foundation of a building before you can see it. Lord Vicus did his best. He was old and careful and deeply loyal, and he managed the kingdom's business with steady hands. He had tried 12 times to speak with Sorvith about her grief. He had brought letters from the other sovereigns, offerings from the temple, reports from the healers who were still trying to understand what had taken the princess so quickly. He had arranged visits from the most respected spiritual leaders on Varades Prime, beings who had spent centuries studying the nature of loss and recovery. Sorvith had sat through all of it without a word, without a flicker. Vicus had run out of ideas. He sat in his office each evening and stared at his own walls and wondered what else he could possibly do. The answer, it turned out, was nothing. Because what was coming was not something he had planned. On the 40th day in the pale morning light, a small ship entered Varades Prime's atmosphere and descended toward the palace landing ground. It was a human vessel, compact, slightly dented at one corner, painted in the gray and blue colors of Earth's diplomatic service. It landed with a low hum and a puff of steam from its engines, and 6 diplomats, 2 assistants, and 1 small boy climbed down the ramp into the cold morning air. The visit had been arranged months before Vaethra's death. A cultural exchange, routine, low importance, the kind of thing that filled the calendar of a large kingdom without ever being the most important item on it. When the princess died, Lord Vicus had considered sending a message to cancel it. He had even written the message. But Sorvith, in one of her rare written notes, had waved it through. Perhaps she did not want the outside world to know how badly things had stopped working inside the palace. Perhaps it did not matter to her either way. The humans were shown to the guest wing and given warm rooms and food they recognized. They were polite and quiet and clearly aware that they had arrived during a difficult time, even if no one had told them the details directly. The lead diplomat was a woman named Sarah Marsh, careful, professional, experienced in the particular art of being a guest in someone else's complicated situation. Her son was a different matter entirely. Kobe Marsh was 9 years old. He had sandy brown hair that never quite sat flat, a gap between his 2 front teeth, and a small tin box that he carried with him everywhere. The tin box held 12 colored pencils, most of them worn down to short stubs, and a drawing pad with about 30 pages left in it. He had brought it on the ship because long journeys were boring and drawing made them less so. He had come on the trip because there was no one to watch him back on Earth. His mother had considered leaving him with his aunt, but Kobe had made a strong and sustained argument for coming along, and Sarah had eventually agreed on the condition that he stayed close, stayed quiet, and did not touch anything in the palace without asking first. Kobe had agreed to all 3 conditions with great sincerity. He lasted about 20 minutes before a small glowing creature drifted past the guest wing doorway. It was round and soft-looking, about the size of his fist, and it glowed with a pale blue light that pulsed slowly in and out like breathing. Kobe had never seen anything like it. He leaned out of the doorway and watched it float gently down the corridor, moving without any obvious effort, drifting the way a soap bubble drifts in still air. He looked back into the guest room. His mother was reviewing papers at the small desk. The two assistants were talking quietly in the corner. No one was looking at him. Kobe stepped out into the corridor and followed the creature. It moved slowly enough that he could keep up without running. It turned one corner, then another, then drifted toward a section of the palace that looked older and darker than the guest wing. The stone here was blacker, the carvings on the walls more detailed, the air slightly cooler. The creature floated toward a narrow gap in the wall, low to the ground, half hidden behind a carved stone pillar. Kobe crouched down and looked at the gap. It was a ventilation passage. He could feel the faint movement of air coming through it. It was about the width of his shoulders, maybe a little more. The glowing creature drifted through it and disappeared. Kobe looked down the corridor in both directions. Empty. He looked at the gap again. He got down on his hands and knees and went through. The passage was short, only about 3 body lengths, and came out into a room on the other side that stopped him completely still the moment he stood up and looked around. The ceiling was so high above him that the top of it was lost in shadow. The walls were black stone covered in thousands of tiny carved dragon figures, and the light in the room came from long narrow windows near the top of the walls, sending pale beams down across the floor in slow-moving columns. The floor itself was smooth and cold and so dark it looked like still water. At the far end of the room, on a throne made from a single enormous piece of dark rock, sat the largest living creature Kobe had ever seen. He stood very still and looked at her. She was immense. Ancient-looking, the way mountains are ancient, not just old but shaped by time into something that seemed like it had always been there. Her scales were deep charcoal gray, with faint silver at the edges that caught the light from the high windows. Her wings were folded close against her back. Her claws rested on the arms of the throne, pressing into the stone. Her eyes were half closed and fixed on a point on the far wall, and they were the color of old gold, dull, flat, like coins left too long in the dark. She had not noticed him yet. Or if she had not moved. Kobe stood in the middle of that enormous, silent room and looked at the great dragon on the throne, and he felt something he did not have a word for yet, a kind of heaviness in the air, the way a room feels after someone has been crying in it for a very long time. He did not run. He had not yet learned to be afraid of large things simply because they were large. He walked forward. His boots made small, soft sounds on the stone floor. He stopped about 5 steps from the base of the throne, sat down cross-legged on the cold ground, opened his tin box, picked up the blue pencil and began to draw. Sorvith noticed the boy the moment he came through the gap in the wall. She noticed everything that entered her throne room. Even now, even in the deep gray fog of her grief, that old instinct had not left her. 300 years of ruling had made her aware of every door, every window, every shift in the air of any room she sat in. It was not something she thought about. It simply happened the way breathing happens. So she saw him the moment he stood up and looked around. She watched him take in the ceiling, the walls, the carved figures and the stone. She watched his eyes move across the room slowly, the way a child's eyes move when they are genuinely amazed by something and have not yet learned to pretend they are not. He was small. Very small. The room made him look even smaller, a little figure in a very large space, standing on the dark floor with a tin box in one hand and his mouth slightly open. She expected him to see her and freeze. She expected the wide eyes, the sharp breath, the stumbling backward step. She had seen that reaction many times from creatures who had wandered somewhere they were not supposed to be and suddenly understood their mistake. Even adult diplomats sometimes went still and pale when they first saw her up close. She was large. She was old. She had that particular quality that very old and very powerful things sometimes have, a weight to them, a pressure in the air around them, that smaller creatures feel before they fully understand what they are looking at. The boy looked at her. He did not freeze. He did not go pale. He did not stumble backward. He tilted his head slightly to one side, the way a small animal does when it hears a sound it finds interesting. Then he walked forward. Calm, easy steps. His boots made quiet sounds on the stone floor. He stopped about 5 steps from the base of her throne, sat down cross-legged on the cold ground as if he had done it 100 times before, opened his tin box and picked up a pencil. Sorvith stared at him. He did not look up. He set the tin box on his knee, balanced the drawing pad on his other knee and began to draw. The pencil moved in short, careful strokes. His tongue pressed slightly against the corner of his mouth the way children's tongues do when they are concentrating hard on something. Sorvith waited for him to speak, to ask something, to explain himself. He did not. He just drew. The throne room was completely silent except for the faint sound of the pencil moving across paper. That small, dry, scratching sound. Sorvith could hear it clearly. She could hear almost anything clearly. Drackery hearing was sharp enough to catch the movement of insects through stone walls. The sound of a child's pencil on paper in a silent room was, to her, as clear as a voice. She did not know what to do with this situation. In 300 years of ruling, no one had ever simply walked into her private throne room, sat down on the floor and started drawing. It was so far outside anything she had expected that her mind kept turning it over, looking for the correct response and finding nothing. There was no protocol for this. There was no precedent. So she did nothing. She watched him. He was drawing something with serious attention. She could not see the page from where she sat, but she could see his face, the small frown of concentration, the way his eyes moved between the page and something in the middle distance, as if he were drawing something from memory or imagination rather than from life. Every so often he would switch pencils, reaching into the tin box without looking, finding the color he wanted by touch. Several minutes passed. Sorvith realized, somewhere in the middle of those minutes, that she had stopped staring at the far wall. She had been staring at the same point on that wall for most of 40 days. It was a small section of stone between two carved figures, completely unremarkable, and she had been looking at it because it was empty and asked nothing of her. She was not looking at it now. She was looking at the boy. He finished whatever he was drawing. She saw him tilt the pad and look at it from a slight distance, the way people look at things they have made when they want to see the whole of it at once. He seemed satisfied. He reached into his tin box one more time, did something small at the edge of the page and then looked up. He looked directly at her. Not at her claws. Not at her wings. Not at the general large and intimidating shape of her. He looked at her face the way people look at other people when they are actually trying to see them. He held the drawing pad up toward her with both hands. On the page was a drawing made in a child's hand. Rough lines, simple shapes, the kind of drawing that is more feeling than accuracy. It showed a large dragon sitting on a dark mountain. Above the mountain was a sky filled with round yellow stars, each one drawn as a careful circle with short lines coming out of it like a sun. The dragon was sitting very still, wings folded, looking out at something the picture did not show. It looked, in its simple and imperfect way, like her. "I drew you," the boy said. His voice was small and even. Not nervous. Just matter of fact, the way children state things they consider obvious. "I hope that's okay." Sorvith looked at the drawing. She looked at it for a long time. It was not a good drawing by any technical measure. The proportions were wrong. The wings were too small for the body. The stars were all slightly different sizes. It was clearly the work of a child who had been drawing for enjoyment rather than skill, someone who drew because they wanted to and not because they were good at it yet. But the dragon in the picture was sitting alone on a mountain in the dark, and there was something in the simple lines of it, in the stillness of the figure, in the way the stars surrounded it without touching it, that made Sorvith's chest feel strange. She did not know this child. She did not know his name or where he had come from or why he had followed whatever had led him through that gap in the wall. She did not know why he had sat down instead of running. She did not know why he had drawn her instead of asking who she was or what this place was or whether he was in trouble. She only knew that he had looked at her, really looked, and then made something and held it up, and the something he had made had her in it. Not the queen. Not the sovereign. Not the powerful ancient ruler that everyone in this palace moved around so carefully. Just a large creature sitting very still on a mountain in the dark. That was what he had seen. And that was what he had drawn. Sorvith's claws, which had been pressed into the stone arms of the throne so hard and for so long that they had left marks in the rock, shifted slightly. Not much. Just enough. The boy was still holding the drawing up, waiting, patient in the uncomplicated way that children are patient when they are not yet worried about whether they are doing the right thing. Sorvith looked from the drawing to his face. His eyes were a plain brown color, warm and direct. There was no fear in them. There was no performance either. No attempt to seem brave, no awareness of how unusual this situation was. He was simply a boy who had drawn a picture and was showing it to the person he had drawn. For the first time in 40 days, the flat gold of Sorvith's eyes shifted. Not to full brightness. Not yet. But something moved behind them, the way light moves under ice when the season is beginning to change, still frozen on the surface but no longer still underneath. She did not speak. But she did not look away either. The boy lowered the drawing pad and looked at it again himself, turning it slightly in his hands. Then he pulled it close, opened the tin box and picked up a fresh pencil. He was going to draw something else. He was going to stay. Sorvith looked at the top of his head, the sandy brown hair that sat slightly flat on one side and stuck up on the other, and she had a thought that she could not quite explain and did not try to. The room felt, very slightly, less empty than it had an hour ago. Kobe started a new drawing without asking for permission. That was simply how he worked. When one drawing was done, another one started. His hand moved almost before his brain decided what it was doing, reaching into the tin box, finding a pencil, pressing it to the fresh page. Drawing was not something Kobe thought about the way he thought about other things. It was more like breathing. It just happened, and while it happened, everything else felt easier. He was drawing a dog. Not pudding specifically, or maybe yes, pudding specifically, but a version of pudding that came from memory rather than accuracy. Pudding was a medium-sized dog of no clear breed, brown and white, with ears that could not decide whether they wanted to stand up or fold down and had settled on doing one of each. Kobe drew the ears first because he always drew Pudding's ears first. They were the best part. He talked while he drew. He did not do this consciously. Talking while drawing was just what he did at home at the kitchen table while his mother worked nearby. He would draw and talk and she would answer sometimes and sometimes just make small sounds that meant she was listening, and that was enough. The talking was not really about getting answers. It was more about the words needing somewhere to go while his hands were busy. He told the silent room about Pudding. He said that Pudding was afraid of rain, which was a problem because it rained quite a lot back home. When it rained, Pudding went under the bed and stayed there until the sound stopped, and the only way to get him out before then was to lie down on the floor and slide one arm under the bed and wait until Pudding decided to press his nose against your hand. Kobe said this in a matter-of-fact way, as if it were simply a known fact about the world, like the color of the sky. Sorvith listened. She was not sure when she had started listening. At some point the sound of his voice had shifted from background noise to something she was actually following. His voice was small and even and moved between topics without warning, the way a stream moves around rocks. Not stopping, not forcing, just finding the next direction naturally. He talked about the ship journey to Varades Prime. He said it had taken 4 days and that the food on the ship was fine, but the bread was not as good as the bread at home because ship bread was always a little flat and a little dry and never had enough butter. He said his mother had let him have the window seat for most of the journey because she knew he liked to watch the stars. Then he said, without any change in his voice, without any warning, "My grandma died last year." He kept drawing. The pencil kept moving. Her name was Pat. She was really good at card games. She always beat everyone and then pretended she hadn't been trying very hard. He paused to pick a different pencil from the tin box. "I still think about her a lot. Mostly in the mornings for some reason. I don't know why mornings." Sorvitha's eyes moved slowly from the middle distance to the back of the boy's head. He was still not looking at her. He was shading something on his drawing, pressing lightly, then a little harder, then lightly again. "My mum told me something after Grandma died," Kobe said. "She said grief is just love with nowhere to go." He tilted the drawing pad and looked at it from a new angle. "I didn't really understand it at first. But then I thought about it for a while and I think I get it now. Like, the love doesn't disappear just because the person does. It's still there inside you. You just can't go anywhere anymore. So it sort of sits there and feels heavy." He turned the page to a fresh angle and started working on the ears again. "She said you don't have to make it stop. You just have to find somewhere to put it for a little while. Like drawing or talking or just sitting somewhere quiet." He nodded slightly to himself as if confirming something. "That helps. Just sitting somewhere quiet helps a lot, actually." The throne room was very still. Sorvith had not moved. But something inside her had. Something very small and very deep, the way a single stone shifts at the bottom of a very deep lake. Invisible from the surface but real. She had heard many things said about grief in the past 40 days. The spiritual leaders had spoken to her about the journey of the soul and the nature of loss in the great pattern of the universe. Lord Vikas had written her careful letters about the importance of the kingdom and the responsibility of leadership and how Vaithra would have wanted her to continue. The healers had spoken about the physical effects of sustained grief on a Drakari body and the importance of eating and sleeping properly. None of it had moved anything inside her. This boy, talking about his grandmother and his dog while drawing on a small pad of paper, had moved something. She did not fully understand why. She thought it might be because he was not saying any of it to her. He was not trying to reach her or fix her or pull her back from wherever she had gone. He was just talking the way people talk when they are comfortable and not performing for anyone. And because he was not trying to do anything to her, her walls had not gone up against it. The words had simply come in through the quiet, the way cold air comes under a door. Grief is just love with nowhere to go. She turned the sentence over in her mind slowly. Vaithra had been gone for 40 days. And in those 40 days, Sorvith had not spoken her name. Had not looked at her rooms. Had not touched any of her things. She had locked every door that led anywhere near her daughter, and she had sat in this stone chair and stared at the wall and told herself she was being strong. But maybe she had not been strong. Maybe she had just been stuck. Maybe the love was still there, exactly as large as it had always been, pressing against the inside of her chest with nowhere to go, and that was why the weight was so unbearable. Not because grief was too big to survive, but because she had not let it move. She was still thinking about this when it happened. Kobe's red pencil slipped. It rolled off his knee, hit the stone floor with a small sharp sound, and skittered across the dark ground. It traveled a surprising distance for such a small object. The floor was very smooth and very slightly angled, and came to a stop against the side of Sorvatha's front left foot. Right against her scales. Touching her. Kobe looked up, located the pencil, and stood up without hesitation. He walked toward her. Not carefully. Not slowly. Not the way someone walks toward something they are afraid of. He walked the way you walk toward something you simply need to go and get. Direct, ordinary, his eyes on the pencil and not on the enormous ancient dragon queen whose foot the pencil was resting against. He reached her foot. He crouched down. He picked up the pencil from where it touched her scales. He was close enough that she could have reached down and closed one claw around his entire small body without any effort at all. He did not think about this. He stood back up, looked at the pencil to make sure the tip was still good, and walked back to his spot. He sat down. He put the red pencil back in the tin box. He picked up the brown one instead and went back to drawing. Sorvath looked at her own foot. She looked at the exact spot where the pencil had been. Where the boy had crouched without fear and picked it up and walked away. Then she looked at him, at his back, at his slightly uneven hair, at the small focused movement of his hand across the page. Something moved through her chest that she had not felt in 40 days. It was not happiness. It was not relief. It was not anything large or dramatic or easy to name. It was something much smaller than all of those things and much quieter. But it was warm. For 40 days, everything inside her had been cold and gray and still. And this small thing, this one small, quiet, warm thing, moved through that cold like the first thin light that comes before sunrise, when the sky is still mostly dark but one edge of it is no longer quite black. Kobe finished drawing the ears. He tilted the pad, looked at them, and seemed satisfied. Then he held the drawing up toward her without turning around, just lifting it back over his shoulders so she could see it. It was pudding. Sort of. A round, happy-looking dog with one ear up and one ear down. "Do you have any pets?" he asked. His voice was completely easy. Like they had been having a normal conversation all along. Like they were just two people sitting quietly together in a room. Sorvath did not answer his question about pets. Not because she was ignoring him. But because the question had landed somewhere unexpected and she needed a moment with it. Pets. She had not thought about small kept creatures in a very long time. Vaithra had kept a pair of winged lizards when she was young, small bright green things that lived in a carved wooden box in her room and ate soft fruit from her fingers. She had named them both the same name, which had caused confusion, and had laughed about it every single time. Sorvath had forgotten about those lizards until just now. The memory came in quietly without warning, the way memories sometimes do, not crashing in but slipping in, through a door that had been left slightly open without her noticing. Kobe was still holding the drawing over his shoulder, waiting. She looked at the picture of the dog. One ear up, one ear down. Round body, short legs, a tail drawn as a single curved line. Simple and imperfect and somehow full of something, the way the best simple things often are. "No," she said. It came out before she decided to say it. Just the one word, low and quiet, like something that had been sitting at the back of her throat and finally found a way out. Kobe lowered the drawing and looked at it himself again. He nodded, accepting this answer without any particular reaction. "Pudding's really good," he said. "You should get one sometime. Dogs are good when things are hard." He turned back to his tin box and started looking through his pencils. Sorvath sat very still. She had spoken. One word. It had not felt the way she expected it to feel. She had thought, on the rare occasions when she thought about it at all, that speaking again would feel like an effort, like pushing something heavy up a slope. But it had not felt like that. It had just come out. Small and plain and ordinary. One word. She looked at her claws resting on the stone arms of the throne. Kobe had found the pencil he was looking for, a dark brown one, worn down to about half its original length. He held it up and looked at the tip, decided it was good enough, and then seemed to have a thought. He turned and looked up at her properly for the first time since he had picked up the fallen pencil. "Do you want to try?" he asked. She looked at him. "Drawing?" he said in case it was not clear. "I've got enough pencils. You can use some." He held the tin box up toward her slightly, offering it. I've got loads of colors left except blue. I always run out of blue first. Sorvith looked at the tin box. Then at her own claws. Her claws were each roughly the length of the boy's forearm. Her hands, if you could call them hands, were built for gripping, for power, for the particular demands of a creature that had evolved at the top of everything. They were not built for small careful things. I do not think I can hold one of those, she said. 3 words this time. They came a little easier than the one had. Kobe considered this seriously. He did not dismiss it or say of course you can the way adults sometimes did when they were not really listening. He actually looked at her claws, then at the pencil in his hand, then back at her claws, working through the problem the way a small engineer works through a problem, practically with genuine interest. Try holding it more at the side, he said. Not like how I hold it. More like here. He demonstrated, gripping the pencil loosely between 2 fingers near the middle rather than near the end, the way you might hold something fragile. That way you don't have to press as hard. He stood up and walked toward her, holding the pencil out. Sorvith looked at this small boy walking toward her with a pencil held out like an offering, completely serious, completely unafraid, and she felt something that was very close to the thing that happens in a chest just before something funny strikes you, not quite laughter but the space just before it. She reached down slowly. She took the pencil from his fingers with 2 of her claws, the way you might pick up a single thread from a flat surface, carefully, with more attention than the action seemed to require. The pencil did not snap. It sat between her claws, small and slightly ridiculous, like a twig held by a mountain. Kobe nodded with great seriousness. That's really good. Okay, now I'll put the pad on the floor in front of you and you just press lightly. Really lightly. He set the drawing pad flat on the stone floor at the base of her throne and stepped back. Sorvith looked at the blank page. She looked at the pencil between her claws. She leaned forward very slowly, bringing the pencil down toward the paper with the kind of concentration she usually reserved for treaty negotiations and military strategy. The pencil touched the page. She pressed very lightly and moved it. A line appeared. Dark brown, slightly uneven, real. Kobe made a small sound of encouragement. Good. Now do another one next to it. You're drawing a dog. I have never drawn anything, Sorvith said. That's fine, Kobe said. Dogs are easy. He sat back down beside the pad, cross-legged, watching with genuine interest as the Dragon Queen of Varades Prime leaned over the edge of her ancient stone throne and tried to draw a dog with a half-used brown pencil. It was not fast. It was not smooth. Each line required its own separate decision. Where to start, how hard to press, when to stop. The pencil felt absurdly small and her claws felt absurdly clumsy, and the figure that was slowly appearing on the page bore very little resemblance to any dog that had ever existed anywhere. But it was something. It had a body, roughly oval, larger on one side than the other. It had legs, 4 of them, though they were different lengths and pointed in slightly different directions. It had a tail that curved upward like a question mark. The head was perhaps the most ambitious part and also the least successful. Large, round, with 2 eyes that were different sizes and ears that looked more like wings than ears. Kobe studied it with a completely straight face. That's really good, he said. You can tell it's happy. Sorvith looked at the drawing. It does not look like anything real. That's okay, Kobe said. He reached over and pointed at the drawing's lopsided face without touching it. Grandma's drawings never looked like real things either. She used to draw our family at Christmas every year and none of us looked like ourselves at all. But you could always tell which one was which. And they felt like us. He sat back. I think that's the most important part anyway. Sorvith looked at the drawing again. A creature with too many uneven legs and a question mark tail and ears that looked like wings. She did not know if she agreed with him. But she kept looking at it. It was at that exact moment that the doors of the throne room burst open. 3 guards came through first, large, armored, moving fast. Behind them came a palace official named Dorvek, who was responsible for the guest wing and who had been in a state of quiet panic for the past hour since the human child had gone missing. Behind him came 2 more guards. All of them stopped when they saw what was in the room. The Dragon Queen leaned slightly forward on her throne, holding a small brown pencil between 2 claws, a child's drawing pad open on the floor at her feet. The boy sitting cross-legged beside the pad. The drawing of a dog that looked like no dog. The silence that followed lasted about 4 full seconds. Dorvek opened his mouth. He was going to say something, an apology, an explanation, an offer to remove the child immediately, something formal and careful and full of the right words for a very wrong situation. Sorvith spoke first. 1 word. Quiet. Completely level. Leave. Not angry. Not loud. Just certain, the way very old and very powerful things are certain, without needing to be anything else. Dorvek closed his mouth. The guard stepped back. The doors closed. The throne room was quiet again. Kobe had watched all of this without moving. When the doors closed, he looked at them for a moment, then looked up at the enormous stone throne above him. The vast carved chair, the high dark back of it, the armrests marked with 40 days of claw prints pressed into rock. He looked at it for a moment with a thoughtful expression. Then he looked back at his drawing pad and said in a perfectly ordinary voice, "You've got a really big chair." Sorvith looked down at him. And deep inside her chest, in the place that had been cold and still and gray for 40 days, something shifted. Small. Quiet. But unmistakably, undeniably, warm. The doors had been closed for a long time. Outside in the corridor, Dorvek stood with his hands clasped in front of him and said nothing. The guards stood at their posts and said nothing. Everyone who had gathered near the throne room doors, and there were more of them now, word having traveled through the palace the way word always travels in large quiet buildings, quickly and without any single person seeming to carry it, stood and waited and said nothing. They had all heard it. One word. Quiet and level and completely certain. Live. The Queen had spoken. Lord Vikas had been in his office when the news reached him. A young aide had come through the door with an expression that was trying very hard to be professional and not quite managing it. Vikas had listened to the report, the human child, the throne room, the pencils, the word, and then he had sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a long moment. 12 times he had tried to reach her. 12 carefully prepared attempts. Letters written over several drafts. Visits arranged with the most respected figures on Varades Prime. Reports, offerings, gentle words from old friends. He had tried everything that wisdom and loyalty and 300 years of serving the crown had taught him to try. And a 9-year-old boy with a tin box of pencils had walked through an air vent and done in one afternoon what none of it had done. Vikas looked at the ceiling for a while longer. Then he stood up, straightened his robes and went to find Sarah Marsh. Sarah was in the guest wing sitting room when Vikas arrived. She was not sitting. She was standing near the window with her hands pressed together and her eyes on the door, the way a person stands when they are trying very hard to remain calm and not finding it easy. She had been told her son was in the Queen's private throne room. She had been told to wait. Those two pieces of information had not combined well inside her chest. When Vikas came through the door, she straightened immediately, ready to speak, ready to apologize, ready to do whatever needed to be done to fix whatever Kobe had managed to break simply by existing in the wrong place. Vikas held up one hand gently. "He is safe," he said. "He is completely safe. Please." Sarah let out a breath that she had been holding for a long time. Vikas sat down across from her and folded his hands on the table and told her, quietly and plainly, what had happened. The glowing creature. The air vent. The pencils. The drawing. The word the Queen had spoken. He told her all of it without making it larger than it was, but also without making it smaller because it was not small. Sarah listened with her hands flat on the table in front of her, very still. When Vikas finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "He does this at home too. Just sits next to people. He sat next to our neighbor for 3 hours after her husband died. Didn't say much. Just stayed." Vikas nodded slowly. "It appears," he said carefully, "that your son has a particular quality." Sarah almost laughed. "His teachers call it not knowing when to leave." "Yes," Vikas said. In this case, that was exactly what was needed. It was nearly evening when the throne room doors opened. Not because anyone had knocked. Not because a guard had announced anything. They simply opened, and Sorvitha's voice came through them, low and even, carrying the particular quality that her voice always carried when she was not making a request but simply stating what would happen next. "Bring the mother." Dorvek moved immediately. Sarah walked to the throne room with quick steps and a carefully composed expression. She had dealt with difficult meetings before. She had sat across tables from people who held enormous power and needed careful handling. She was good at this. She reminded herself of this as she walked through the great doors. Then she saw the room and forgot to remind herself of anything. The ceiling. The carved walls. The columns of pale light from the high windows, now turning gold and amber as the evening came in. And at the far end, on the great stone throne, the Dragon Queen, ancient, enormous, dark-scaled, sitting with something different in her posture than Vikas had described from earlier in the day. She was not leaning forward. She was sitting up. Not rigid. Not the frozen stillness of grief. But upright, the way someone sits when they have remembered that they have a spine. Kobe was still on the floor at the base of the throne, cross-legged, drawing something new. He looked up when his mother came in and gave her a small wave, completely relaxed, as if he had simply been waiting for her in an ordinary room. Sarah stopped a respectful distance from the throne and looked up at Sorvith. "Your Majesty," she said carefully, "I am very sorry if my son—" "He did not cause trouble," Sorvith said. Her voice was low and a little rough at the edges, the way a voice is when it has not been used in a long time. But it was steady. "Sit." There was no chair. But Kobe patted the stone floor beside him without looking up from his drawing, and after a moment, Sarah sat down cross-legged on the cold ground next to her son. Sorvith looked at them both. A woman and her child, sitting on the floor of her throne room in the evening light, the tin box of pencils between them. She was quiet for a moment. Not the old quiet, not the heavy locked silence of 40 days. This was a different kind. The kind that is thinking. "Your advisors came to me," she said finally, looking at Sarah. "Not yours. Mine. Lord Vikas and the others. They came with letters and healers and people of great learning. They said careful things. Correct things." She paused. "None of it reached me." Sarah nodded slowly, not sure yet where this was going but listening with her full attention. "I could not explain why," Sorvith continued. "For 40 days I sat in this room and every voice that came into it was trying to do something. Fix something. Move me somewhere. Pull me back." Her eyes moved to Kobe, who was still drawing, still quiet. He did not try to do anything. He sat down and drew a picture and talked about his dog. Sarah looked at her son. Kobe, sensing that he was being discussed, looked up briefly and then went back to his drawing without comment. "He told me," Sorvith said, "that grief is just love with nowhere to go." The words landed in the room softly. Sarah felt something tighten in her throat. She knew when she had said those words. The kitchen table, the week after Kobe's grandmother died, early in the morning when Kobe had come downstairs and found her already awake and they had sat together in the quiet and she had tried to find something true to say to a small boy who was hurting. She had not known he had kept it. She had not known he was carrying it around with him in that tin box alongside the colored pencils, ready to take it out when someone else needed it. She pressed her lips together for a moment and said nothing. "He sat with me," Sorvith said. "That is all. He did not try to take the grief away. He did not pretend it was not there. He brought something small and ordinary into the room and let me be near it." Her voice was steady but something moved underneath it, the way deep water moves under a calm surface. "In my culture, grief belongs to the one who carries it. You carry it alone. You do not bring others into it. I have been sitting alone with mine for 40 days and I had not moved at all." She looked at the drawing pad on the floor. At the rough drawing of a dog that was still there from earlier, too many legs, tail, lopsided ears. "Your son moved something," she said simply. Sarah looked at Kobe. He had finished his new drawing. He looked at it for a moment, then carefully tore it out of the pad. Not the new one. He reached back several pages and tore out the first one, the dragon on the dark mountain under the yellow stars. The first thing he had drawn in this room. He stood up and walked toward the throne. He held the drawing up toward Sorvith with both hands. "You should keep this one," he said. "For your daughter. So she's got something of yours near her." The throne room went completely still. Sorvith looked at the drawing. The rough lines. The careful round stars. The dragon sitting alone on a mountain in the dark, surrounded by light that did not quite touch it. She reached down. She took the drawing between two claws, slowly, carefully, the way you take something that cannot be replaced if you drop it. She held it, and she did not put it down. The morning came slowly on Varadi's prime. The sky did not turn blue the way it did on Earth. It turned deep red first, then a burnt orange color at the edges, then finally settled into the dark crimson that passed for daylight on this world. The twin suns rose low and slow, and the black mountains caught their light and held it, and for a short time everything on Varadi's prime looked like it was made of fire. Sorvith watched the sunrise from her window. She had slept. Not well and not long, but she had slept, actually slept, in her bed for the first time in 40 days instead of curling on the cold floor beside the base of the throne. She had woken before the suns came up and gone to the window and stood there watching the sky change color and thinking about what she was going to do. She knew what she was going to do. She had known since last night, since the moment she had taken the small drawing from Kobe's hands and felt the paper between her claws and understood that something had shifted inside her that was not going to shift back. She had sat in the throne room for a long time after Sarah had taken Kobe back to the guest wing. She had sat with the drawing in her claws and the evening light fading around her, and she had let herself think about Vaithra. Not about her death. About her life. She had opened that door very carefully, The way you open a door when you are not sure what is on the other side of it, and what came through was not the crushing weight she had been afraid of. What came through was her daughter. Vaethra herself. Alive in memory the way she had been alive in the world, loud and fast and full of opinions about everything. Sorvith had sat with that for a long time. And then she had made a decision. Lord Vicus received the message at first light. Brief, written in the Queen's own hand, direct in the way her written notes always were. He read it once, then again, then set it down on his desk and sat very still for a moment. Then he stood up and began making arrangements. By the time the crimson morning was fully established in the sky, the great hall of the palace had been prepared. Not for a formal court session, not with the full ceremony and the long waiting and the careful order of things. Just the hall itself, open, the long stone space where the court gathered, the advisors and generals and senior officials who ran the business of the kingdom. They came in quietly, most of them not yet knowing why they had been called, all of them carrying the particular tension of people who have been waiting for something without knowing exactly what they were waiting for. They waited. Then Sorvith walked in. Not carried, not announced, not preceded by the usual formal procession. She simply walked in through the side entrance, the one she used when she did not want ceremony, and moved to the front of the hall and stood there. Not on the throne. Not elevated above them. Just standing at the front of the room facing them. The hall went completely quiet. Sorvith looked at her court. At the faces she had known for decades and in some cases centuries. At Vicus, standing near the front, his old hands folded in front of him, his eyes very steady. At the generals and the advisors and the officials who had kept everything running while she sat on her throne and stared at the wall. She took a breath. Her name was Vaethra, she said. Her voice carried through the hall clearly. It was still rough at the edges, still not quite the voice it had been before 40 days of silence, but it was strong. Strong enough. She was 24 years old. She flew too fast and she knew it and she did not care. Sorvith paused. Not because she was struggling. Because she wanted to say it right. She argued with her tutors about history because she had read more than they expected her to and she wanted them to know it. She landed badly from dives and always looked around immediately to see if anyone had seen. A very small pause. I always saw. I never told her. The hall was absolutely silent. She smelled like rain and burnt cedar after a long flight. She named her childhood lizards the same name, both of them, and thought this was funny every single time it caused confusion. Sorvith's voice stayed level. She was stubborn in the particular way that people are stubborn when they are right more often than they should admit. She woke before the suns every morning because she liked to be in the air at first light. She said the world looked different from above at dawn. She said it looked like it was just beginning. Something moved through the hall. Not a sound exactly. More like a shift in the air. I have not said her name in 40 days, Sorvith said. I thought that was strength. I understand now that it was not. It was only silence. She looked at her court, at the faces that were carefully composed and the eyes that were not quite managing the same composure. We will not be silent anymore. We will say her name. We will say what she was like and what she loved and what she argued about and what she smelled like after a long flight. That is what she deserves. Not silence. She stopped. Lord Vicus, who had served her for 140 years and had never once in all that time allowed his composure to slip in a formal setting, looked very carefully at the ceiling. He was not the only one. Sorvith let the moment sit for a breath. Then she said, "That is all." She turned and walked back out through the side entrance. The human delegation's ship was scheduled to lift off at midday. Kobe did not know about what had happened in the Great Hall that morning. He had spent the morning in the guest wing, packing the last of his things into his bag, fitting the tin box carefully into the side pocket where it always went. He had 4 pencils left, the red one, the green one, the yellow one, and a dark gray one he had barely used. No blue. He had known he would run out of blue. He was zipping the bag closed when the palace official came to the guest room door and said very formally that the Queen requested the presence of the young human before departure. Kobe looked at his mother. Sarah nodded. He picked up his bag and followed the official back through the palace corridors, the proper way this time, through the wide halls and past the carved archways and through the tall doors that the official opened with a key. No air vents. No glowing creatures. The throne room looked different in the morning light. The high windows let in the red-gold light of the twin suns, and it fell across the dark stone floor in long warm columns that had not been there yesterday evening. The carved figures on the walls caught the light and seemed for a moment to breathe. Sorvith was standing at the base of the throne rather than sitting on it. She was very large in the morning light. Large and old and dark-scaled, with the silver edges of her scales catching the gold from the windows. She was holding something in one claw, small, dark, on a thin cord. Kobe walked across the floor toward her and stopped a few steps away and looked up. "You're standing up," he said. "Yes," Sorvith said. Kobe nodded as if this was a satisfactory answer. Sorvith lowered herself, not all the way down, but enough to bring herself closer to his level, folding her front legs so that her head was not quite so far above him. She held out the thing in her claw. It was a pendant. Small, carved from dark stone, smooth and carefully shaped. Set into the center of it was a single scale, her scale, silver-edged, catching the light the same way her scales did when the sun hit them right. It hung on a thin cord of braided dark fiber, the kind that did not break easily. Kobe looked at it. "Among my people," Sorvith said, "giving a scale is not a simple thing. It is not a gift the way most gifts are gifts. It means you were here. You were real. What happened between us was real and I will not forget it." She held it a little closer to him. "Take it." Kobe took it carefully with both hands. He turned it over once, looking at the scale, at the way the light moved in it. Then he looked up at her. "What you did yesterday," Sorvith said, "no elder could do it. No healer. No advisor. They all came with the right words and the right intentions and none of it reached me." She paused. "You came with pencils and a drawing of a dog. And you sat down. And you made sure I was not alone in the room with it." She looked at him steadily. "That is not a small thing. Even if it felt like one." Kobe held the pendant against his palm and looked at it for a moment. Then he looked up at her with the direct, uncomplicated gaze that had not changed once since he first walked into this room. "You're going to be okay, you know," he said. Not as a question. Not as encouragement exactly. Just as a fact he was stating because he believed it completely. Sorvith looked at this small human boy, soft, short-lived by every measure the galaxy used to measure such things, standing in her ancient throne room with a pendant in his hands and a bag over one shoulder and 4 pencils left in a tin box. "I know," she said. And she meant it. The ship lifted at midday. Sorvith was on the high balcony above the obsidian courtyard when it rose. She had gone there directly after Kobe left the throne room, climbing the long stairs that led to the open platform above the palace. The wind on Varades Prime was cold at that height, and it moved through her folded wings and across her scales, and she stood in it and watched the small gray and blue ship rise from the landing ground below. It climbed steadily, growing smaller. The crimson sky swallowed it slowly, the way the sky swallows everything that rises high enough, until it was only a shape and then only a light, and then only a point among the many points that the twin suns made bright. She watched until she could not see it anymore. In her right claw, held carefully and without any intention of putting it down, was a small torn piece of paper. A child's drawing. A dragon on a dark mountain under a sky full of round yellow stars, each one drawn as a careful circle with short lines coming out of it like tiny suns. The paper was thin. The lines were imperfect. The dragon in the picture was too small for its wings and the mountain was more of a triangle than a mountain. It was the most carefully held thing in the palace. The wind moved across the balcony and lifted one corner of the paper gently, and Sorvith adjusted her claw without thinking, keeping it safe. Below her, in the great hall, her court was gathering again, not because she had called them, but because that was what courts do after their queen has spoken. They gather and they talk and they begin, slowly, to move again. She could hear the distant sound of it through the stone, voices, movement, the particular sound of a place waking up after a long sleep. She had a kingdom to return to. She knew that. She had always known that, even in the worst of the 40 days. The kingdom had not stopped needing her simply because she had stopped being able to meet it. But she stood on the balcony a little longer. She looked at the place in the sky where the ship had been. The galaxy had made its decision about humans a long time ago. Small, soft, short-lived. Too full of feeling for their own good, too quick to cry, too quick to attach, too quick to sit down on cold stone floors next to things that were grieving and simply stay there. The galaxy had called these things weaknesses. The galaxy had not been in this throne room yesterday afternoon. It had not seen what happens when something soft sits down next to something that has gone cold and gray and still, and simply, without trying, without forcing, without any plan at all, brings a little warmth back in. Sorvith looked at the drawing in her claw one more time. Then she turned from the balcony and walked back inside. She had a daughter to speak about. A court to return to. A kingdom that had been waiting 40 days for her to come back. She was ready.